Okay, here we go. Let's get started. Let's make some art today by a great artist. You ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we are going to be looking at the art of Marie Bracquemond, or Marie Bracquemond, I guess. I'm trying to think of the most English way of pronouncing it. Sorry. Marie Bracquemond was one of the great Impressionist painters who, unfortunately, up until very recently, was written out of art history, deliberately so, and we'll get to the tragic story of why that happened when we talk about her biography in just a few minutes. This is the painting we are going to recreate. I love this painting. It's called Afternoon Tea from 1880. And after about another 10 years of painting like this and exhibiting with the Impressionists, she stopped painting almost altogether, even though she lived for another 25 plus years. Very sad story. But anyway, let's get to the positives here. Let's talk a little bit about the process for today's episode. We are going to begin with getting that image onto the canvas. I'll show you how to do that, where to find that. Then we're going to stain the canvas. As I said, we'll talk a little bit about Marie Bracquemond's biography. Then we're going to do a little bit of underpainting. We haven't done a bit of underpainting in a while, so this will be, maybe just a slightly bit more challenging of a painting than we've done thus far over the past few months. And then we're going to do our normal thing, go in the background, paint a little bit there, paint in the foreground, bounce back and forth a little bit. I'm anticipating about 3 hours from now doing our side-by-side comparison, because it'll take us a little bit longer, but my wife's going to dance class at 8 o'clock, so I got to get done before then. Anyway, so it will be a bit of a race here. If you want to support the channel, you're watching for the very first time, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell so that you know when upcoming episodes are upcoming. And then as well, what I would love for you to do is to take a photograph of your artwork and join our Facebook group. Upload your artwork to the Facebook groups, because once a month I go through all of the beautiful stuff on there and give people feedback. We'll look at that in a moment. If you are so inspired that you want to support the channel, as many of you have and continue to do, like what's allowed me to buy all these cameras and equipment and continue doing this, please consider leaving $1 through PayPal or the Super Chat function here within YouTube, right where you leave the comments. If you see a little dollar sign, you can do that. Or you can contact me via my email or the Facebook group. All of those links are in the description below. So, our first step is we want to get the image onto the canvas. Now, we could sketch this out, but one of the things that you can do is, and maybe I'll just, this is the Facebook group, links down below. Right below that link is a link to the Dropbox folder. And if you go into the Dropbox folder, you're going to see our most basic introductory episodes, including our buyer's guide there. There's a playlist for all those episodes down below. And then these are our most basic paintings that even a beginner, a child can do. And then as we go down here, we go to Marie Bracquemond. That's the file we're about to open. But if you want something a little more complex than even what we're doing today, there are lots of, there's paintings by artists from all over the world, every culture. Well, not everyone, about 20 or 30 major cultures here. And then we go into major cultures. That sounds kind of offensive, isn't it? We go into, come on, let's go into this folder, Marie Bracquemond. You'll see there's 3 files in here. Those 3 files correspond to the original image, and then the outline that is there. There's a PDF and a JPEG, and you can take that and print it out, as I have here. onto just a regular piece of photocopy paper, and then I'll show you what to do next. Oops, we want that view. Okay, let me get this book out of the way, which we'll talk about shortly. And I'm going to show you how I do these outlines. I like to do them pretty quickly because my goal is not to get a perfect outline. And you know what? I might just move this up a little bit. There's a lot of space above her head, so maybe I'll just move that up and I'll fill this in with a little bit of the table at the bottom. Okay, so I tape that down, and then I'm going to use some carbon transfer paper. There's a link to carbon transfer paper or graphite transfer paper. They do the exact same thing. And you can see I've used this a number of times before. You want the shiny side facing down. Trust me, I've made the mistake many times where I put the wrong side down and you spend all this time copying and then you realize the image isn't actually on the other side of the canvas. So a good thing to do, you get a little bit of a line on there, flip it up, and oh yeah, the image is transferring onto the paper or canvas or board or whatever material you are using to paint on. So we don't have to make sure all this is perfect, just as long as we get, like all these grapes. I'm not even going to do all these grapes. You'll see here, kind of like, that's, I think, good enough for that part, right? And we got the tea glass. Let's get this book. Another painting that we did a couple of years ago that might be kind of similar to this is Renoir's painting of the woman reading. And I saw a few people just recently on the Facebook group have done that painting. So if you're interested, there's that one to do. And that one I actually did before I was using the outlines to do it. So if you don't have an outline and you feel like this is a little bit too complex to kind of sketch out on your own, you can do the Renoir painting, which is a very similar composition, and I walk people through step by step on how I would sketch it out directly onto the canvas. Now you can get these carbon paper sheets at your local fabric store, because this is the exact same process that people transfer a pattern onto fabric before they cut it and sew it together, right? So additionally, the fabric store will likely have different colors of carbon paper, including white, which if you're doing a painting on black velvet, you can use the white to do that. And speaking of which, there is the very famous cats or dogs playing poker on black velvet coming up soon as a surprise bonus episode. So it's a good idea to hit that notification bell so that you can see when that surprise episode comes down the pipeline. Let's see, just a few more. I think that's probably good enough, right? It's not perfect because I don't really care if it's perfect. Let me just get her knuckles though. I think that might be helpful. Okay. There we go. I like to keep these on file so they're just out of the way if I need to refer to it. Sometimes you get a lot of paint built up and it can be hard to see exactly where the lines are supposed to go. So if you got your template nearby to refer to, it's very handy. Okay, wow, cool. Lots of people watching. What should we do next here? Let's go to our next step. I guess we're there already. Okay, so now that we've got our image on the canvas, we're going to stain it with a little bit of color. So the method that the Italian painters have been using since even before the Renaissance is called the Imprimatura. We're going to stain the canvas with a little bit of color, and that's going to permeate through the entire picture and give it this warm glow. Now, the way that we're going to do this is we're going to use a yellow as our Imprimatura. It's not the technically artists would have used a kind of a rusty red color, but I just really like bright color, as did Marie Bracquemond and Paul Gauguin, who was one of her mentors. So even though I don't think she would have used yellow, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is the color I'm about to apply onto the surface of the painting, this Azo Yellow Deep. Now, if you would prefer, you could use golden, you could use Liquitex paint, you could use Winsor & Newton, Artist Loft from Michael's Art Supply, Buzz, Peebo, Holbein, Daler-Rowney, Fevicryl, Nova Color, Chroma Color, but not Museum Color, because I have found that all of those colors have a little bit of white mixed in, which makes it impossible to make black, which is very frustrating, especially if you're making an Impressionist painting. So, let's get this yellow out. I'm also using what we call a split primary palette, which means we have 2 yellows and 2 reds and 2 blues. And I might put just a little bit less paint on the painting this time, so it's not super yellow. But I don't think it would make much of a difference either way, even if you did. So I'm adding water to my paint, and this is the only time I ever use water when I'm painting with acrylic paint, because if you think, we use water to clean our brushes when we're painting with acrylic. So if you add too much water in it, you're literally breaking down the bonds that hold the acrylic, or not the molecules, the pigment together and bind it to the surface. The reason why it's okay to use it for your Imprimatura is that this painting that we're painting on has been pre-gessoed, or it's got gesso on it. And gesso is a plaster-based paint, or it's paint that has plaster mixed into it, and that gesso absorbs water really well. Like, just think about, if you have a plaster cast on your arm and you get it wet, it gets wet really quickly like a sponge, right? So, but we would be sort of discouraged to do, let's say, this exact same thing over top of another bit of paint, because like I wouldn't do a wash like this over top of a finished painting or something, or it's got more layers of acrylic on it, because the paint is just not going to stick very well to it. And you run the risk of that paint literally kind of flaking off, depending on exactly the method that you used. Okay. So the reason why I made it just maybe a little bit less intensely yellow than I sometimes do is that one of the techniques the Impressionist painters did was that they sometimes even painted directly onto white canvas. And that was a deliberate reaction to the way that they would all have been trained how to paint, which is the traditional method of using the Imprimatura. And so the Impressionists were radical because they basically took all the rules that artists had been following for hundreds of years and kind of threw it all out the window and said, we're just going to do invent a whole new way of painting, and we're going to question every single preconceived notion of how a painting is made. So one of those was the application of the Imprimatura. So I would probably say that one of the reasons why it's so common for people today to not apply the Imprimatura is owed primarily to the Impressionists. And, you know, the Impressionists are not a bad group of people to learn from, as we're going to be doing today. But I think, you know, those were really experienced painters who learned the quote-unquote rules before they broke them. And I think it behooves anyone who's interested in painting to likewise learn maybe the benefits of this sort of ancient and very useful method of painting than to simply just go right to what you know, you're not, yeah, to just going to exactly to what the Impressionists did. Anyway, long story short, I'm just applying all of my paint on here. So now I've got my 2 yellows, my 2 blues, my 2 reds, and a little bit of white in the middle. And if I need a black, I can mix my black, and we will do a little bit of that for today, in today's painting. So I'm just going to move this off to the side, because I want to have this fella nearby to talk about. Yeah, let's take off the watch. Okay. So now that we've got the drawing, the image transfer or underdrawing, as you might call it, as well as the Imprimatura started, while that's drawing, let's talk a little bit about who Marie Bracquemond was, and you know, a little bit of this tragic story that I mentioned at the very beginning of the episode. So, Marie Bracquemond is born in 1840 and dies in 1916. And yet the vast majority of the work that she did was done before the turn of the 20th century, before 1900. And so if we go down to her early life, you know, Marie Bracquemond is born into maybe a difficult childhood. Her mother and father had an arranged marriage, and they didn't really get along that well. And she ended up staying with her mother most of the time and traveling, and not just traveling, moving with her mother around France, even into Switzerland, before eventually settling in Paris. So there would have been lots of like an unsettled childhood with lots of movement, lot of getting to know different kids constantly. And I think, like a lot of people who've had those experiences, many of them get into like activities like sports, or you know, today maybe video games or art, right? So that was one of the things that she turned her attention to. And one of her early teachers, because really art was not really taught to women really up until maybe the 1940s, really, were women really allowed into art school across, you know, in the Western world. So prior to that, most women had to take private art classes. There were sort of kind of art classes that existed for some women, particularly more wealthy women, that would be, you know, along the lines of training women to have a little hobby here and there while they stayed at home and minded the house, kind of thing. And so some of them would learn watercolor paintings alongside, you know, homemaking skills like laundry and things, right? So it wasn't really, you know, it was like crafting So it wasn't really an actual art education, right? It was just sort of to keep women busy because you didn't want them doing too much thinking, right? Anyway, one of her early teachers that she had was an art restorer, Auguste Vasseur, and he often gave classes to women, and he was, I think, just sort of, I don't know, but I just imagine her, the young Marie, going to his studio and taking classes from him and seeing probably some pretty good paintings that he was working on, that he was restoring, and it probably gave her access to kind of the behind the scenes of how art was made, like how you get a glimpse into how the sausage is made, kind of thing, right? That probably was quite inspiring. It would have been like, I would to this day, I would love to go and just watch an art restorer, take a old painting and take the varnish off and touch it up and fill in the cracks. That would be fascinating, right? So I just imagine that would have been very inspiring for her. Vasseur also taught her a drawing and painting techniques, and by age 17, she had made a painting that she submitted to the Paris Salon and was accepted and put on display, which is, a remarkable thing for a woman, let alone a 17-year-old woman. I mean, that's almost unheard of, right? I don't know exactly what the statistics were, but that would have been very rare for anyone under 50, to be exhibiting in the Salon. And the Salon was the most powerful, really the only way for an artist to exhibit their artwork back in the day. And so every year there would, or maybe twice a year, there would be maybe a fall and a spring exhibition, and artists would submit their work, and there would be a kind of a prize for the best portrait, the best painting of a landscape, and all, et cetera, et cetera. And there would be literally thousands of paintings in these great kind of giant gymnasiums, hung floor to ceiling, sometimes literally on the ceiling, sometimes leaning on the floor, jammed up side by side, and that's where we get the term to hang artwork salon style. And so that was a remarkable achievement for a young woman at the time to do. So it was through that first exhibition in the Paris Salon where her work came to the attention of really one of the greatest artists in French history, let alone of all time, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. And Ingres was, he's one of my, one of my favorite artists. We've seen a couple hundred of them, but he's been super influential to me. Ingres was you would call a neoclassical artist. And let's just see if, what would be one of his, okay, I love this painting by Ingres. And he's really known for these very super soft, beautiful renderings of figures, and that he was one of the main figures of, as I said, the neoclassical movement. So really, they were looking at ancient Rome and Greece as inspiration for their paintings, and yet sort of combining it with Christian themes and imagery, as well as representing contemporary figures like Napoleon and contemporary events that were happening at the time. So he would be sort of the most dictionary definition of an academic artist that you can possibly imagine, right? Because we've talked about the Academy and how the Impressionists rebelled against the Academy. Well, it's interesting that she becomes a really important Impressionist figure, but her really most foundational, really the instructor where she really had her first, as closest to a formal education as a woman would have at the time, was basically the exact embodiment of everything that the Impressionists were rebelling against. It's significant that she took classes with him, but she wrote later on that the severity of Monsieur Ingres frightened me because he doubted the courage and perseverance of a woman in the field of painting. He would assign to them only the painting of flowers, fruits, of still lifes, portraits, and genre scenes. But that was very typical. So you're saying, well, what else is there to paint? Flowers, fruits, still lifes, portraits, genre scenes, and genre scenes would be, often domestic scenes of often women and children in the house or in a field somewhere. What is missing? Landscape painting and history painting. Those are considered to be the pinnacle of what a painter could do. And of course, they were off limits to women anyway. So she writes here that he wouldn't really let her do any of that, but I don't think any other school or artist would have been allowed. If a woman submitted a history painting to the salon, it would have been rejected outright anyway. But he's just saying that, like, if I kind of interpret that, is that he had probably seen a number of women kind of come and go who just sort of gave up because they're just like it would have been so hard to kind of make any inroads as a female artist back in the day. You're just like you're constantly running into walls that these old guys are setting up to prevent you from moving forward in your career. She eventually leaves the studio of Ang and is commissioned by the Empress Eugenie, who was the wife of Napoleon III. So that's when you're commissioned by the emperor's wife. That's how does it get any better than that? Like, you're now at the peak, right? You're now one of the, you've got the stamp of approval. And from that, she's then commissioned by the head of the French museums to go to the Louvre and make copies of many of the famous paintings that are on exhibit, because those paintings would sometimes be sent to art schools outside of Paris, or they would be purchased by wealthy landowners throughout Europe, or they would be sent to small galleries around Europe or France for people in other areas, let's say in the south of France, who didn't maybe get a chance to travel to Paris very often. So that, again, is a huge honor. So the fact that she's existing in that space, and then 100 years later basically disappears from all of art history, is like, what? How did that happen? So it's while she's in the Louvre painting that she meets this fellow, Felix Bracquemond, who later becomes her husband. Felix Bracquemond was a printmaker, and he was very famous. So here's an example of one of his prints. And printmakers at the time, one of their major roles would be to take famous paintings and make prints of them so that they could be reproduced. They would draw them very carefully, and then those prints could be made to be printed in newspapers and books, etc. Because this is before you could have color images in books, just like the one I have here. So he made quite a name for himself. He was also very important because he's really largely responsible for helping to introduce Japanese art and Japanese prints in particular to the French public. And within a few years of the work that he did, you have this, there is this mad rage for anything Japanese, right? People become fascinated with the East, and there's exhibitions. There are artists like Claude Monet, who becomes one of Mary Bracquemond's mentors, becomes obsessed with Japanese art, and so much so that he builds later on a Japanese garden in his backyard. And then you have Vincent van Gogh, who becomes obsessed with Japanese prints, and we see Van Gogh making copies of some of the famous prints by Hiroshige, and so he's an important figure, but he's also in many ways a very negative force in Marie's life. Well, at first they get along, and it seems like they have a fantastic relationship. They have a child together, their son Pierre, who later is the one that writes the biography of his parents, and who's not particularly kind to his father and the role that his father played in his life as well as his mother's life. Together, Felix and Marie, they I don't know if it's mentioned here, but they work as in a ceramics factory. He basically is the creative director of this very famous pottery company. Does it say in here? I don't know where it is, but so the two of them are making plates and bowls and decorating those bowls, and because there's the rise of interest not just in Japanese but in Chinese art, and you hear the term like people want authentic China pottery, right? So even though it's not really authentic, a lot of it is made in Europe. So that's one of the things that they work on together. Throughout this entire time, she continues to paint, and she starts becoming more and more interested in Impressionism, which is really just sort of begins around the mid-1870s. The probably the most famous of them would be Claude Monet and Edgar Degas and Edouard Manet and so on and so forth, who see her work, and they see her work becoming less and less academic and more impressionist based, and they sort of take her under their wing. They encourage her to paint outside, which is a radical, revolutionary change in the way that artists are painting. Prior to that, artists are painting in their studios, and now because of the advent of pre-packaged tubes of paint, it allows artists to just throw a bunch of paints in a backpack and go for a walk into the forest or into a field, set up an easel, and just start painting, which was impossible for artists to do just 5-10 years before that, right? So she also starts painting outside, and when you're painting outside, the weather's changing, the sun is changing, the time is of the essence. So it's not a surprise that artists start making the types of paintings that the Impressionists do, that are literally capturing a brief moment, an impression of the passing of time, of people sitting in a park, chatting and laughing, going to a cafe, playing with their children in a field underneath a tree, etc., etc. Because you just don't have the time to do much more elaborate paintings. So here's just a few images. This would have been, one of her paintings that she made before she kind of switched into the Impressionist style. In fact, we see here some of her earlier works, and you can see it's not too long, between the 1870 and the 1880s, when she really kind of fully embraces that Impressionist approach to painting. What do I want to say beyond? So, as I kind of started to mention, the relationship between her and her husband kind of starts to deteriorate as she starts kind of moving out of his orbit, and he's more interested in much more academic art, like her former mentor, and she starts moving into the orbit of Monet and Degas, and Felix cannot stand the Impressionists. He hates that art. It's sort of antithetical to his entire worldview of art. His training in art, he had a more formal, as a man, he would have had formal training in art. And what the Impressionists were doing was just literally disgusting to him. It was like creating a bunch of half-finished paintings. So he constantly degraded her and her art, was not supportive. He would not show it. He refused to allow any of her paintings to be shown on the walls of their house. So whenever guests came over, they were not allowed to see any of her work. He didn't show it to anyone, even though he was he was at the time more well known than she was. And of the 157 paintings we know that she made, only 31 of them have survived. And there is speculation that he's responsible for having destroyed many of the paintings that were still in the house that hadn't been sold or given away to other people. So probably the only ones that have survived were ones that were not left in the family home, which is extremely sad. We're talking a woman who was seen as an equal by Claude Monet and Edgar Degas, and later on Paul Gauguin, the best buddies with Vincent van Gogh, was a fan of her work and really encouraged her to brighten her palette up. So this is a person who's at the time like a really important central figure in the Impressionist movement, whose husband is not supportive of her work, and essentially she gets so frustrated and run down with arguing with her husband about her passion, that she eventually just gives it up entirely. There's thought to be a few paintings she made over the intervening years from about 1990 or 1890 till 1916 when she passes away. But again, we don't really know whatever happened to that work. You know, he dies just a couple of years before she does. So, you know, it's maybe at the very end of her life she had a little bit of freedom but by that point, you know, she was 75 years old, so it was, you know, I think she had probably resigned herself that part of her life was over. But she was still very supportive of the Impressionist movement, even though she was still not exhibiting with them. And obviously many of the Impressionists had already passed away. But, you know, and by the time, you know, the 1916, you have Cubism is now starting to spread all over, which would have been very, you know, that would have been very totally different. But I think probably she would have found that really interesting and exciting, just seeing how art had kind of continued to evolve over the decades. And I'm sure Felix, her husband, was not a fan of those avant-garde art movements at all. So, let's, you know, so I guess maybe just the end here. It is tragic that her husband sort of pushed her to the point where she lost her passion in art and gave it up entirely. That is obviously extremely unfortunate, and not just a tragedy for her, but I think just for art in general. So it's not surprising that when, you know, people started to kind of put together the history of Impressionism, there was just, she had sort of kind of disappeared, right? And so she was largely written out of the history of Impressionism, and it's really not until the 1970s and 80s where like feminist art historians start kind of going back and finding little mentions of her name appearing in places. She'd exhibited 3 times with the Impressionists, which is, you know, there weren't that many Impressionists. At the time, there would have been about 20 people. So for them to have, you know, a few women part of that group would have really elevated them from total obscurity into like very important artists. So it wasn't until like the 1980s, you know, 60 years after she dies, that she's sort of brought back into the and given her proper place in art history. There was an art exhibition just a few years ago that traveled around parts of the United States called Women Artists in Paris, and that features a lot of other women just like herself that were not really given their due. So this is an excellent book, and you'll see some paintings by some of these artists as we go forward here, like a Berta Morisot. Who are some of these other great women in here? Well, there's today's painting, right? So let's turn our attention back to actually making some art. And wow, lots of comments here. Well, I'll get to them in a moment. Okay. So this looks like it's dry. Okay, So now that we've got a little bit of an understanding of who this great artist was, let's do our best to try to recreate a painting by her. So the first step that we're going to do here is we're going to mix and apply what we call an underpainting. And there, as I've mentioned many times before, there's lots of different ideas and definitions that people have of an underpainting. And I myself have kind of used that term loosely over the years. But the way that I apply it now is that the underpainting is, like, some people will say just like the kind of what I would call like my background pass number 1 and 2. Some people would say that would be an underpainting. The way that I apply it is to think of maybe just outlining certain key areas or compositional elements so that when future layers of paint become applied, there's still kind of little remnants of them, so we can find those places so they don't get completely buried, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make well, you know, I was going to paint a mix of black and apply it here, but it's, you know, black is a color that the Impressionists used very infrequently. Now, we might say that looks like black, but I guarantee that's a really dark blue or purple. I mean, I don't really see any pure black in this painting at all. Again, that just looks like a deep ultramarine blue. So you know what? I'm just gonna use ultramarine. I was going to mix a black, but I'm just gonna go to my blue here, because the Impressionists, they really wanted their paintings to glow with light, and unlike the academic artists that they were rebelling against, and light wasn't really something they thought about or worried about, they were all more interested in structure, and they privileged, because they were painting in a studio, often just from their imaginations, and so you see a lot of those academic paintings are often very dark and browns and grays and blacks, because contrast between light and dark was what they were after. The Impressionists wanted contrast between light and dark, but they also wanted contrasts of color, because they're painting outside and they're really looking at light. So in the spirit of the Impressionists, I'm just going to use my warm blue to do a little bit of underpainting. And I'm going to bring up the original side-by-side here. Okay, so, you know, what I would do is just sort of paint in just a few things, like her eyes. Her nostrils here. Gonna quickly go around the shape of her face, and don't worry about making any mistakes or anything in this here. This is just so that we know that in fact there's eyes roughly there and not up here or down here, right? Now we can do a lot of this or little. It doesn't really, you can kind of make your decision as to how much you want to do. Let's go down to the book here. You know, like if I was just doing this painting on my own by myself, I would probably do, I might even skip this step. Interestingly enough, though, that it's probably quite... So, we talked about how Marie Bracquemond, one of her most important and earliest teachers, was the famous academic artist J.A.D. Ung. And Ung was, as I said, the symbol of the textbook example of an academic artist. And an academic artist would spend a lot of time really sketching out a scene and figuring out exactly where every single little detail should go, so that the whole painting was very rigidly planned out. And sometimes that meant that the resulting paintings were pretty stiff and awkward. And interestingly enough, despite the fact that Marie became, a very important Impressionist painter, it's believed that the way that she worked was, she created this very important foundational structure underneath all of her paintings. So while they appear to be improvised in the same way that the Impressionist painters improvised their many of their most famous paintings, she, on the other hand, still went back to some of her important training and did a lot of preparatory work before she created these paintings. So what that I think means is that she probably did something like sketched, like for instance this person here. I'm not sure exactly who this is in the image. Potentially could have been her sister. She had one sister. It's possible that maybe her and her sister would have gone outside, and she might have sketched some drawings of her sister, gone back to the house, and because she probably didn't really have a real studio, maybe because her husband certainly didn't encourage her, so probably just at the kitchen table she made this painting. And she would have sketched it out onto a canvas or a panel maybe several times, maybe doing the same painting a number of times, and then when she was happy with it, probably went back outside with her sister dressed in the same clothing, and then painted her probably much more quickly at that point with the colors that she saw around her. All right, so it's a sort of a combination of the academic training that she had received and then the influence of the Impressionists painters that she had begun exhibiting with. Okay, so I could continue doing this over and over, but I think that's enough. Like, basically, this is so that if her face just gets covered with white or, some kind of green or whatever color I might apply next, I can still see where those eyes and things are going to be. Okay, let's go to our next step here. Now that we've got the image, the Imprimatura, and our underpainting applied, let's start applying some color into the background. So let's just take a quick look at the background itself and just think about, where to begin and what colors to make for this. So when we look at our palette and you think like what colors do I even begin with? The first thing I would just say is you want to use your cool colors in the background. So that already eliminates half the colors. If we're going to use cool colors, then we want to use our cool red, our cool blue, and or our cool yellow. Right? So that immediately eliminates those warm colors. So that already tells us, well, now we just have 3 colors plus white to work from. So And then I would start with the thing that's the furthest in the background and then work my way forward, right? So in this painting, it appears to me that the things that are furthest away from me is this area in the top left corner where it looks like we have some, like a hillside with these buildings, maybe a monastery or something back there. I'm not sure exactly what that is. So the colors that we see here, we've got like some purples and some blues, even a little bit of pink and green, maybe a bit of a little orange and or peachy colors. So let's mix some of those and start our painting. So as I said, and actually, so I have lots of different brushes and different sizes. Now, ultimately, I'm going to be using, the brush I just used for my underpainting. I'm going to be using that, but I don't want to start with a tiny brush right now. Otherwise, I'm just going to get sucked into the details. And then I'm going to be in this corner of the painting for the next 3 hours. As I said, I've got to get this painting done in the next couple of hours or less. So we want to kind of fill in more stuff with a bigger brush first. So what I'm going to start with my cool blue, and I'm going to mix a little bit of my cool red into it, and that's going to give me kind of a purpley color. And it's not going to be as intense of a purple as if I used my cool red and my warm blue. That would give me an even brighter purple. And I'm going to paint with this. I'm also going to add some white into that color. That's going to kind of soften it, because white is going to make something kind of recede into the background. So let's just see this up close here. So we're going to use this color here. And then as I paint, I'm going to add maybe a little bit more red into it, a little bit more blue, and then I'm going to start introducing a little bit of cool yellow into it, which is going to make it go brown, and then maybe a little bit more peachy as some of the blue falls off, right? So we'll do this together, but just sort of just giving you a tip of how we'll proceed here. So how about let's zoom right into this corner here. And where is that? Yeah, the tree kind of goes up. So, like an Impressionist painter, I'm going to kind of just blob in paint like this. And there's little bits of that are going to show through the trees. So I'm going to put a little bit of that in just a few other places. I think there's a little bits coming through on the other side of the painting. So I'm just going to put little bits here and there. Maybe this will all disappear later on. We'll see. And then down there, I don't know if there's much down there, but maybe just a little bit in here. Okay. Now I'm going to take just a bit more of my magenta, my cool red, and just mix that in here like that. And just kind of fill in a little bit more of these gaps. So you can see that I'm not filling in all of the yellow just yet. I'm working my way towards that. And honestly, I'm not really looking at the original here. I just want to get some of these cool colors in the background as quickly as possible. Okay. Now I'm just going to take a bit of my cool yellow and bring that back over here. Let's just mix this into here a bit. Get a bit more of a peachier color. And I'm not at all concerned about getting the color right at all, because I know that I might have to change some of that later on. Now I'm going to take maybe a bit more white. Let's paint that castle. So I've got some white, some yellow, and some red. Gives me this kind of peachy color. And because there's a little bit of that blue in there, you can see it's almost going a little bit gray. Right? Which I like, because that's kind of like what this building looks like. So in fact, I might just quickly paint that in like that. Is there, oh yeah, there's this other part of that. Okay. And then maybe up here, apply a little bit of that color there. And maybe just take a bit more white. Let's get a little bit of blue on there. There is another building back there, but I don't even know if I'm going to bother with it. We'll see. Okay. Oh, and let's just put this. Okay. So got that started, and you can see, like, now that that starts to form a little bit, it's easier for me just to kind of make a judgment of like, oh, okay, well maybe next time I put a little bit more blue over there. It looks maybe a little bit more purple, but I'm not sure yet, because I got all this yellow still really occupying a lot of the canvas. So if I commit to a color right now and really try to make that perfect, I might realize 20 minutes, like, whoa, I put the wrong color there. Why did I spend so much time working in that area when now I gotta repaint it, right? So I'm just gonna keep moving forwards. So the next thing I wanna do is work on the greens that we see here. So we've got a lot of green and dark brown and dark blue in these areas. So let's take some of our cool yellow and cool yellow and cool blue and mix a green here. And I'll maybe start with a little bit more of a saturated green and just kind of put some of that in here. Now, she would have done this maybe more carefully than I'm going to do this, but as I said, I got a bit of a time crunch, so I'm going to be a little bit sloppier than this great artist was. You know, you can see that each brushstroke there is kind of much more carefully done, but we're also at the kind of an early stage of this painting, right? So don't think about getting it perfect just yet. Just think of getting something in here. We're building it up. bit of that. Let's put a little bit of red in here now. As I put a bit of red into that color, let's get a bit more of it. We're going to start getting kind of more of a brown. Well, actually, right here, I was going to make a bit of a brown. This is kind of a nice darker color. So let's just use some of this darker color right now. So this is, I mean, I kind of find this quite fun, kind of just applying this paint quickly and kind of randomly in here. It kind of looks a little bit like what the pointillist artists did, right? Should have painted a pastel there. In fact, while I still have a bit of that color mixed, I guess I don't have that much, but I'm just going to take this. This kind of white and gray. I've established where some of those lighter areas are supposed to go. So here I am just sort of looking kind of lazily at some of those areas in the background, and okay, gives me an idea where maybe some of the little pops of light are going to come through the trees. Let's take a bit more of this yellow. Let's take our cool red and cool yellow. We got a red. It's not, I'm just going to add a little bit of blue into it, cool blue, to just take some of the, maybe that was a bit too much. Well, let's mix it in well. There we go. Because I didn't want to be too bright red or orangey. So now I've got a kind of a much darker brown. And then now, once we start getting this, we could almost kind of start sculpting. Well, actually, no. Let me take that back. I was going to say we could start kind of sculpting these bushes out, but I think we might save that for the next step, or when we go back to the background in our second pass here. I really just want to kind of fill in as much of the yellow here as possible. So don't worry if it's kind of, I'm sure people just tuning in right now look at this and like, ah, he's got it all wrong. What a kind of idiot. That's okay. Let them think whatever they want. We're just building the foundation of our painting in here. It's going to get darker in places and lighter in other places. I think... Oh, you know what? Let's do... I might do a little branch here. I'm going to take a little bit of my smaller brush just while I'm here. And articulate where this... I'm not going to do all the details in it. I'm just now starting to kind of lay in where that goes, though. Okay. Actually, maybe before I even wash these brushes, let's, I'm going to start adding more white into this bottom left corner here. So add a little bit of white into this kind of brown. And that's because, you know, she's sitting probably like in the shade of this bush, and then you have this bright light that's illuminating the area behind her, right? So it's getting more intense sunlight on it. Let's take a bit more blue. And a bit more yellow. Just a bit more red in there. Again, this color is basically completely wrong for this area. It doesn't bother me one bit. I wonder if there anywhere else. Maybe I'll put a bit of that back here. That's okay. You know what? Actually, I'll take, sorry, a bit of that color, and I'm just going to come right back next to this tree and just kind of clean that up. Okay. Clean the brush. And we'll move to our next step here. Okay, so we've got some color in the background, color that's not really accurate in any way. Let's do the same thing with the foreground. Put some color that's just very generic approximations of what the final result will be as kind of our foundational layer. Again, what some people may even call the underpainting. People watching in England right now, in the UK, it's 1 in the morning. You guys are dedicated to making art. I love it. Okay. So our first step here is we're going to start using, we used all cool colors in the background. we're going to use warm colors for the foreground, right? So when we had previously used our cool blue, our cool yellow, and our cool red for every color in the background, we're now going to use our warm blue, our warm yellow, and our warm red in the foreground, because the cool colors will tend to recede, warm colors will advance towards us, right? So where should we start? Let's start with her face, right? Let's not put off the inevitable here. Let's get let's mix the color first, and then I'll zoom in. So what we want to mix well, any kind of skin tone really. We want to start with our warm yellow, a little bit of warm red, and we mix this together and we get an orange, right? And if we were painting Donald Trump, that would be probably the right color to use for his skin and his hair, but instead we're going to use, we're going to paint a kind of more natural skin tone. So we're taking some my warm blue and mix this just a little bit in there. Right, the more we put in here, the darker it's going to be, and the more brown it's going to be. Right, so if we were mixing a darker skin tone, we would use more blue. So now we've got kind of a sandy color. Not sure how well that shows up on camera. And then we're just going to add white to it. If you don't have much blue in it, this is going to look like a very peachy color. So this is pretty close just for a generic skin tone. Now there's no that color might be used in places, but there's, just like in the painting we see here, there are areas where her face has got green and red and purple and blue and lots of different colors on there. So we'll eventually get to that point. But for my purpose here, especially because I'm in a little bit of a time crunch, I'm just going to paint her whole face with this color. Now you can see why having my underpainting there is helpful, because this, if I just painted this color right over top of the pencil lines there, it's possible that all those pencil lines would just disappear. But now I can still see them because I've got my blue underpainting. Those lines are preserved there. So we'll put that on her face. And I'm also going to do the same with her hands down here. So it's the white that's in this color, which is very opaque and will block out whatever's kind of underneath it. So the more white you put in here, the more opaque, the more it's going to hide what was there previously. So now what this is going to allow us to do is we can add nuance over top of this in those smaller brush strokes, and we can add the greens and the purples. Like we look at her hands here, I mean, that's almost like bright red under here. It's maybe almost like a crimson red, and we got some green here, green under there. So there's, you know, lots of different colors there. Maybe the only place where this color remains that I've painted is maybe this part of her wrist, maybe that part of her wrist up there. Otherwise, a lot of it's covered. You know, and maybe while we're still here, though, let's just see if there's other places where we can use this color. And it might seem kind of strange because, well, why would we put a skin tone on the tablecloth when the tablecloth, as far as I know, is not made of skin? Well, because this color isn't just for skin, we can use it all over the place, right? So now that I've got it mixed, you know, I can see a few areas where we could put it, right? Potentially just down here. And notice how like I'm covering up some of these blue lines. Those blue lines can be kind of helpful. In maybe some areas I want to keep them there, but in other areas maybe they're a little bit less helpful. Right, I'm just sort of like wiping the paint off my brush almost, just getting, and you know, there's some funky colors coming out, you know, some yellows and stuff. That's okay. Right, whatever we don't like, we can always get rid of. We can always paint over anything, right? Now I'm just going to add more white into the same mixture. Let's get this tablecloth. And here I might just be more, just fill this in with a much, you know, just quickly get that in place. In fact, let's do this vase like that. I'm going to take that same color. Let's get some of her sleeve in place here. On the other side here, let's get a little bit more blue in here. So this is just my warm blue that I'm adding to that existing mixture. Because I've got yellow and red in here, when I add that blue to it, depending on how much blue, like right now, it's got a bit of a grayish quality. Yeah, right, and I did notice, like, I painted this line there, and I realized, oh, her shoulder's there, not going up that way. That's okay, so I'll just trim that down when I continue working on that part later on. Again, just notice I want to fill in this, all the spaces as quickly as possible. Even on the book here, just put that color in. We'll create distinctions between them as we go later on. Let's do the same thing, get a little bit more blue in here. Okay. Let's go to her hat next. Again, my white. And there's barely any of this blue on here, right? So it's not like I've got heaps of that color. let's bring a little bit of this red back in here. It was a bit much, but that's okay. Anywhere else? I think on my plate here, I'm going to add a bit of warm blue into this. My warm blue into that here, just to make some of these grapes. Back to some more white. Again, this is not really the right color. That's okay. Maybe I can paint that same color elsewhere while I still got it on my brush. Okay. And then the book. That book has got kind of like a green. Some of my white, and again you can see that I'm just sort of, things get kind of messy in here. The colors aren't nice and clean and separated. I don't even think I've washed a brush a couple of brief times while I've been painting here. But I haven't, I've been pretty loose about the way I'm painting, because the goal is just to get as much down as quickly as possible and then fine-tune it, right? Okay. So now we've obliterated most of the yellow in the background. We still see little bits of it coming through. And that's okay. And it's also okay if by the end of the painting there's still little bits of that yellow coming through. Probably by the end of the painting it won't look like the canvas showing. It'll just look like little spots of yellow that I've put down there, which will work just fine on a painting just like this, right? Pascal says her cheeks are very pink. She read something that made her blush. LOL. Or Pascaline, sorry. There is a Pascal who often watches. Pascaline. Okay. So another thing to kind of observe right now is we've got a lot of pastel-like colors. And that's a pretty key feature of the Impressionists, and one of the maybe slightly defining qualities from Impressionism versus Post-Impressionism. An Impressionist would be Claude Monet, Edgar Degas, Mary Bracquemond, and then the Post-Impressionists would be somebody like Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh, etc., right? So, and the Post-Impressionists sort of took what the Impressionists were doing and then just dialed up the saturation, took a little bit less, put less white in those colors, and white is one of those things that creates pastels, and just ran with the brighter colors. Marie was introduced through her husband to Paul Gauguin, and Paul Gauguin really inspired her to really brighten up that palette, which I'm sure made her husband even happier. I'm sure he was like, oh my goodness, why I should not have introduced you to Gauguin. I mean, I'm already upset that you're friends with Monet and Degas, And now you're friends with Gauguin. Like, pff, okay, that's crazy town, considering how conservative he was in terms of his interests in painting. Okay, so let's just sort of think maybe what the next step is. So a few things are, when I just look at the painting, that obviously we need way more contrast in her body down here. Obviously in her face, we need to bring up colors that aren't there yet. We've got maybe some colors in the background that are way too saturated that need to be kind of tamped down. But now I can see a little bit more clearly the color relationships, like even in the background. So remember I was saying, this needs to be much more blue. Well, I think that's true, but maybe not as blue as I was planning on making it a little while ago. I think a little bit more cool blue back there will work in defining that building, but I don't need to kind of go overboard. So, where should we? Let's go back to the background now. Let's go on to our next pass. So we got background number one, foreground number one done. Let's go back to the background, and ideally we could get it to a place where we could finish the background and then move on and finish the foreground and finish the painting. It is possible that we get a lot of stuff done in the background and then kind of move on before we're totally fine-tuning things, just to see how that works with what we do in the foreground, right? So while many times I try to get the background done in the second pass, it's possible this painting might need me to go back one last time and to add a little bit more to it. Okay. So again, we're going to go into the top left corner because that's the furthest part. And ideally, if we paint that, then we can paint things over top of that, and that will make the background look further backwards in the distance. So at this point too, I'm going to move down to a smaller brush, right? So I've got a little square brush. I love these little things. I've got dozens of these because I love them. This Robert Simmons, is that Simon's Eco, or the E60 Flat Shader by Dyler Rowney, which is also makes lots of acrylic and oil paint, right? The number one size, right? So this is a flat is one that's got like a flat edge, as opposed to one of these round ones that's got a pointy tip, right? So this is my preferred brush. I love using these these flat or square brushes to paint with. Now let's go back to our palette. Let's take some white. Let's take some cool blue, mix this into here. Take a bit of my cool red and mix that in, because right now that's still super saturated. So it's almost, I just adding a little bit of color on the other side of the color wheel. In this case, like my cool red. In fact, let's just bring a bit more over here. Is just going to kind of pull that color a little bit towards the neutral core so that it isn't so saturated. So in a way, it's sort of making this almost a little bit of a warmer color because it's getting closer to this warm blue. Now, where do we want to paint it is the question. See, even that's a little intense. So let's take a bit more red, and I'm even going to take a bit of cool yellow and bring that in there, because that's going to give me just a bit more of a grayish quality. So, you know, in that first pass with my colors, I was pretty sloppy and just sort of throwing things in pretty randomly. Now I'm being a little bit more thoughtful, and I'm trying to have, you know, little brush strokes that, you know, in this case, they almost sort of look like they're all going in a bit of a diagonal pattern, going from kind of top left to bottom right, or kind of at least towards the right there a bit. Oh, there go the lights. Let's get a little bit more red in here. So I'm also just going to go into the areas where I've identified where some of that sky is poking through, and I'm going to just put the same color there. Well, let's do this building there on the left. So let's take some of this color, a little bit of that red, oops. Purple on there. I'm going to get more white on my brush. Yeah, there's that other building up there, but you know what, I'm just going to take that out. I'm just going to keep moving forward. Okay. Let's, I'm going to paint that sky, oops, a little bit here. So paint that sky, get a little bit of blue in there. The original painting is smaller than what I've got, so there's a bit more, oops, you know, that part of the painting is kind of is my own enlargement, so I got a little bit more sky than the original painting. Okay, let's do the green. I was going to clean my brush, but you know what? I'm just going to keep painting with it because I don't mind having a bunch of these different colors appearing, because I kind of want a little bit of a slightly kind of dirty quality to these colors, because otherwise I'm going to keep having like really, really bright colors, and I want things to be a bit more muted, and so I can use the muddiness to my advantage. Let's do. So now I'm applying some of these kind of pastel-y greens into the bottom or kind of central left of the painting here. And remember, there was this area I'm going to kind of clean up there. Okay, there's got a little bit more yellow and red on there. So you see all the kind of sloppy stuff we did there earlier kind of plays in our favor now, because it now creates the look that there's lots of work that's gone into those areas. Before I spend too much more time on here, I don't want to mix the same color dozens of times, so I'm going to try to use the same color that I've been, or these two colors that I've used here elsewhere in the painting. Okay. Let's add more blue. And yellow. bit more just of cool blue. As I go, I'll use less and less white on that left-hand side. I am just going to paint with a little bit more, because what we see is this bright light coming from in behind, and then it's kind of darker in front. So the leaves that are behind are actually lighter than the leaves that are in front, because she's sort of sitting, the tree's blocking the light from in behind her. So we want to kind of create that effect that the light is trying to stream through these bright trees. And maybe while I'm here, I'm just going to add a bit more white in a few places. And I'm kind of deliberately making some of these pops of light in behind her a bit bigger, because it'll be easier for me to cover up them with additional leaves as they go on, right? And have a little bit of that showing through. So I'm making them bigger, parts of it will be covered up. Oops, just a little bit like that. Okay. Let's get some more brown on here, because we've got, I think, a lot of, actually, well, maybe just a little bit more green. Maybe just a bit more green. So my cool yellow, I'm going to take some bit of cool red. So it's going to make it just a little bit more of a grassy green. And again, there's some white in there as well. And I'm kind of painting over top of some of the brightest green now that's here, still here. So that green will kind of stay there in kind of a bit of a ghosted form. And I think that's okay, right? Is that okay? Is that enough? Let's just get a bit more. There's a lot of white in here, and so it's just diluting those colors, so eventually, yeah, there we go, just a little bit less white appearing. Just gonna make it a little bit darker. Okay, let's get a lot more cool red in here. Take a cool yellow, get a bit of a brown. Red. Still a lot of white in here, so not a problem, just it'll be mostly in this area in the bottom left that we'll use it. So I will be using some warmer greens back here eventually, but I want to give quite a foundation of cooler colors in the background before I put any warm colors there. Otherwise it won't, because those cool colors, if I ground it enough with cool, then the warm colors over top of it will kind of hang back, right? Whereas here in the foreground, I've got all warm colors. So I put more warm colors on it, it's just going to keep moving forward. So it's sort of a little bit of a leash holding a little bit of that warmth a little bit further back. So let's now take, again, this kind of slightly pastel brown. And we'll start to kind of shape the trees a bit here and kind of look for the darker kind of masses. So one way to do that is I look at the original with my eyes almost closed. I'm squinting my eyes and I look at it and I'm looking for the darkest areas. And I want to start to kind of identify where those dark areas are and kind of start to kind of create masses of those shapes. Right, so I'm kind of like, I identify up in here being darker. There. Obviously a lot up in here. Okay. I think you know what I think I'm going to do, just considering the time, rather than start painting my warm colors over this, I'm going to start painting, I'm going to go to the foreground and paint her, and then bring some of those warmer colors back into the background around her, just to keep this train moving as quickly as possible. So let's go to now I'm gonna go back into the foreground. I'm gonna bring her closer to a resolution, And then using some of the colors that I'm going to use in the foreground, I'll put some of those back in the background around her. So I'm probably going to end up doing a third pass in the background, as I thought I might have to do earlier. So, there's MD Shawan Islam Shanto says, hello, I'm watching from Bangladesh. Awesome. Hello, my friend. Cool. Great to see people from all over the world tuning in. That's very exciting. So next we're going to, let's do a little bit on the face. I think that would probably alleviate some anxiety some people might have about getting that started. So, or we've already kind of started with a little bit of a flesh tone in there, but I think we want now to actually put some of the color in here. You know, some of those greens, etc. So now we're going back into our warm colors. We previously were all in all cool colors. So we've got our warm yellow and warm blue to create this grassy green. And I kind of want to keep it a bit more on the yellowy side. I don't want to get too dark, otherwise it's going to be, you know, maybe a little bit too much. And let's just see how this works when we kind of put a bit on her forehead here. There's actually a bunch of cool colors that we'll use eventually here. Her neck is almost kind of a green. Okay. Well, you know what? Before I move on, I'm just going to take the same color. I'm just going to bring it up into her hat a bit. Her hand under the book here. You know, this might seem very intense to apply these colors here like this, but we can always paint over it if you feel like you've gone too far. And this is part of like the Impressionist way of working, is these really bright, saturated colors applied in these very aggressive brush strokes like this. Very, like, there's no attempt to kind of blend or hide these. They are there whether you like them or not, right? Now I'm taking, I just took a bit more blue that was here and just brought that onto my brush. scrapes there. Okay. I think while I'm right here, I'm going to start taking this color and bring it back. I'm going to take it and put it into the background right now. I was going to do this as a separate step, but things are going to start kind of, there'll be a crossover between foreground and background as we start using some of the background colors in the foreground and foreground colors in the background. So again, this is going to take some of that, the intensity of those cool greens, that real lime emerald green, cuts it down just a bit from. I still want little bits of that coming through, but not too much. Okay, let's just take a quick look at where we're at. Okay. So next, I'm going to go back into her face here with some, at this time, I think I'm actually going to go into some of my cool colors. So I'm going to take some of this cool red and and white and work a little bit with that. There's some cool reds and warm reds on her face, but I'd prefer to kind of end with warmer colors there. When in doubt, you can always make those ears as red as you can get them. Let's take a little bit of warm blue now, actually, to make a purple. That's going to give us a bit more of a saturated purple. So this is my warm blue and cool red. Maybe just a bit of blue on its own. Just keep on going with this color. So you can see again, this is kind of the place where probably a bunch of people are going to give up on the painting because they're going to be like, whoa, this is just turning into a mess. And I think you just got to keep on going. Just have faith that you're going to pull it out. You're going to make it work. It's not going to be the end of the world. And it's just, you have to, it's like that roller coaster ride. It's going to go up and down, and you're going to have a few queasy moments along the way. But we're just going to keep going. We'll make it work. Just some straight on warm blue. Well, there's a little bit of white in there, obviously, but okay. Let's take a bit of her cool red. So a lot of these colors are going, they're strong right now, but we'll kind of tamp it down as we go. Let's just sort of back out and we can see how we're doing. Okay, looking good. Let's take some of this cool red again. I'm going to go back into her fingers. And now I'm going to put some of that in these grapes here as well. And into this shadow. Now I kind of got just a bit of a dry brush. So instead of just adding white to this, I could just use a bit of a dry brush to get a bit of that in. And there's, since the painting kind of cuts off here, I'm just going to add that in as well, because I would expect to see a bit of a shadow here. That's not in the original, but because this isn't actually there. So I think it needs that. Okay, I'm going as fast as I can. Okay, let's what should I do next here? Lolly says the painting looks fab. Even now at this strange midway purple-eyed stage, it looks so good. Pascaline says, have a sip of tea, Michael. You guys know me too well. You guys crack me up. Okay. I'm going to keep on going. I'm just going to take a little bit more of this blue. And let's, I'm going to paint more leaves in the background here. So I'm going to take my cool blue and cool yellow. I'm also going to take some cool red now and bring that in, which is going to give me kind of a brown color. Because there's quite a lot of that in there. So while this might look very red right now, when it's applied next to everything else, it's going to look very brown. So I'm going to start kind of shaping her hat a bit. So we're going to start getting some much darker clumps forming here, where we'll eventually get more and more blue in, and we'll mix even a little bit of a black. Take some of this warm blue and bring that in now. So we're gonna have a much darker kind of quality here. So now we're gonna build up these dark masses. I'm going to take that same color and I'm going to bring it into, I'm going to put just a little bit up in here. Her hat. going to take even more of that blue. And I think at this time, actually, I'm going to mix a black. I haven't really used black. We haven't used black at all in this painting, so I think it's time we create one. So we're taking our cool blue, oops, and cool yellow and warm red. Mix that together. We're going to get some of all those colors. We're going to cancel each other out. Got to mix it in really good. This looks a little bit on the brown side, so let's put a bit more blue in there. There we go. So that's a pretty good black. So I'm going to take a scoop of that and put it in with my warm blue. So let's take just a bit more warm blue, bring that together, and now we've got a warm blue that's like a really, really dark warm blue. And I'm going to use that to continue to darken. So I just have to be careful I don't kind of slather this on everywhere. Right, we want to continue to do this as these darker shapes back here. And ideally we would take, you know, our time and to build them up. Actually, no, I was going to paint that with this dark, but that's going to be too dark. Let's take our warm red, or sorry, warm blue, and a bit of cool, or warm red and warm blue, sorry. It's not quite as dark. And I'm trying to be very careful about how I'm painting these. Like my brush, I'm holding very loosely. Let's go to a different angle here. All right, I'm just Just a few little darker leaves on here. Let's start bringing some of the facial features back in here. So I'm taking my really dark black that I've mixed. It's got a bit of blue in it as well. So we still need to add more to it, but you know, if it was started kind of disappearing, it's okay to kind of paint it back in 2, 3, 4 times, depending on how far gone it's gone, right? Same sort of thing. Let's just come back down to her fingers down here. Let's get a little bit of warm blue back under here. Whew, it's like a race to the finish here. Okay. That's where we're at right now. So we need to put kind of more nuance in here. We're going to use mostly some whites. So I'm going to be mostly kind of in here with just white, and then just occasionally adding like a little grain of other colors as I go. So I'm kind of filling in the space in between a lot of colors. And I can even paint over some of this. And some of those colors, most of those things are still going to stay there to some degree. Do that on the table as well. Okay, let's bring this back in here. then we got some kind of like almost like little lines here to paint. Let's go a little bit darker again. So I'm going to take my cool blue, bring that into this white. A little bit of cool yellow. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take a little bit of my black to make it just slightly gray. Where was it? Was I mixing it there? Sort of lost track of where I was mixing my color. Let's zoom in even more. I mean, this is what she's done here is just, I mean, it's masterful, right? This is the kind of thing that a painting that established her as one of the all-time greats. So this is, it's tricky to play around on a face like this and to try to get some of these colors correct. But it's good practice for sure. I'm going to take a little bit of my cool yellow and bring that into the same color. Oh, sorry, this is my warm yellow, my apology, that I just brought in here as well. Let's take a bit of my warm red now and white. I need to go even darker, but by a very subtle amount, right? Okay, let's get a tiny brush out. Taking my warm red and my cool blue. Get her nostrils. Some white back into that warm red. Some red back on those ears. Okay. There's a tiny bit of white in those eyes that's visible. And I think we want to make kind of like a purpley version of it, like a really dark. So like this might be our white. Oops. And then I'll come back with that color and just let's leave that face alone for a moment. Let's I think maybe do a little bit of work down on her hands for a few minutes. Where did I have my kind of greenish color? Let's put our, actually, you know what? Yeah, we got a few different colors in here. We've got a warm green on the hands in the foreground, or the hand in the foreground. So I just took my warm blue and my warm yellow. Oops, God, you can't. can't see what I'm doing, darn it. That and... And then we've got a cool blue and even a little bit of gray on the hand behind it. Too much. Let's get more black. Still a bit much, but you know what? I'm just going to paint it in here. I'm going to take this color that I had before, just a bit more blue on it that I used for the hands. Let's just get the vase painted in as quickly as possible here. There's a pattern on this cup. I don't think, well, let's just do kind of a very simplified version of that. Okay, let's back out here. Oh my goodness, it's gonna be tight to get this done to the way that I want it, so probably won't get it done the way I want it, so then I have to kind of make some decisions as to what I can live with and where I can cut corners, because I'll have to cut some corners. So let's go back to this white and green. So this is my white and warm yellow and warm blue. And there's kind of some other messy colors in there, kind of gives it a bit of a grayish, greenish quality. I mean, you know, you can see that the influence of, you know, a painting like this and the Impressionists in general on the work of someone like Henri Matisse, right? We did the famous painting that Matisse did of his wife, the green stripe. And in that painting, there's some very, you know, intense contrasts of color in there. Very saturated colors, not nearly as saturated as the colors we're seeing here, but Matisse clearly saw the Impressionists as having kind of blown open the doors as to how one could use color in a painting, and that we didn't have to worry about getting it quote-unquote right. We could kind of be a little bit more creative and risky with the way that it's applied. I mean, I think, you know, if you could get your painting to this point, I think you should be more than happy. This, Mary Bracquemond is, you know, again, acknowledged as one of the great artists of all time, and if that's how Degas and Monet felt, then that's their word is good enough for me. It's unfortunate that so many of her great paintings haven't survived, and, you know, I'm not necessarily saying it was all her husband's fault, but it's likely that there's still probably a few dozen that are in people's collections and they don't know who they are or who that artist is, and as time goes on, you know, and people pass away and someone decides to do a little bit of research and check out who that painting is by that's on the mantelpiece at Grandma's house is, and whoa, that's, you know, that's, you get those Antiques Roadshow episodes where people are very surprised by what shows up by the valuation of these works. And because sometimes, you know, people are like, oh, I think it's actually just maybe Grandma took a class at some point. It's just Grandma's not a famous artist, and they realize, oh, that's not Grandma's painting at all. That's a really famous artist. And so this is just my warm blue, my warm yellow, and white. There is sort of some muddy colors. There is a little bit of my black that got into here. So what we've got is sort of just like a really, what would you call that green? Like a sage green, basically. And then as I go, I can add a little bit more blue into this mixture, which is going to make it darker and more bluish. position that dish on that side. Oh, I mean, all these little grapes, all those things take time, right? You know, if I'm putting all this sagey color down there, I want to bring some of it back up into her hat so it's not just in one part of the painting, it's kind of all over. That hand, I think I'm just going to make it even darker. Put some more black in here. So it's kind of, I've lost a little bit of that shape. We'll bring it back with some what was I going to say? We'll bring it back with a little bit of red in there. It's still even a little bit. So this, I've been trying to avoid using glaze for this painting because it was not something that was often used by the Impressionists, but just take some warm blue. I may end up doing actually a little bit of glazing on her forehead just to darken that down. I think just before I blow dry and things, I'm going to just fix her fingers. So let's... Okay, so I'm going to take this cool red and my black. So I'm going to paint with a very cool, dark, cool red. How is this book working here? Now these red lines aren't really there, but I'm just going to paint them in anyway. What have I done here? Well, it's not bad, I guess. Do the same thing with my blue, mix it into my black, so I have a really dark blue, warm blue. Change that book and get it. Where can I mix this? Warm blue, warm yellow. Still, I mean, I lightened it up, obviously. I had to, but I'll fix that. Some warm yellow and white. Actually, with that same color, Let's take some of this warm yellow. Should even get some more. Manning says the brushstrokes in her painting are just incredible. How did she get that effect? Good question. Well, first of all, the painting is bigger than this 9 by 12 sized canvas, so she's got a larger surface to work on than I do. So she's able, and when you work on a bit of a larger size, you can kind of add nuance that is pretty hard to do on a much smaller scale like this. So this is my warm yellow with a little bit of white. Probably should have done a bit more of this earlier on, right next to these little windows of light coming through the trees, but never too late. I mean, I got a little bit more light coming in from behind her than there actually is or was. Let's take some of this cool red and white. A bit of that. Go back to my dark cool red. Let's get a bit more peachy color on that hand. Warm yellow, warm red, white. Bring some of this peachiness back onto her face. Just careful not to overdo it. It's almost like a little bit of a dry brush there. Okay, I'm gonna have to wrap up in just a couple minutes, so let's okay, let's do some finishing touches. We could spend another hour on this painting at least, but I'm gonna have to start wrapping up. So I just want to add a few finishing touches, do a little bit of glazing on, you know, the book and her face, just to darken them down underneath her hat. And I've been trying to avoid doing glazes thus far, just because it's not something that Impressionists did a lot of. But because I'm short on time, I'm going to cheat a little bit, because the glaze is going to allow me to use a thin, transparent, or almost transparent layer of paint and a darker color, which I can paint right over top of that, and is much faster and easier than trying to mix the exact right color here. So I'm going to blow dry those areas just so that I don't mix the paint as I paint with it. So I'm just going to mute the microphone for a moment. Okay, so let's use a little bit of glaze, and let's just think about what color of glaze we want to use to begin with. We can do just like a dark, like a black, and just put that on. But I think that is so subtle. How she did that, that is, I mean, that's an incredible use of paint. I think to do that, I'm going to take, that's got white in it. Man, that's, okay, I'm going to take my black. My black that's got a little bit of blue in it, my warm blue. And this is my glazing fluid. I'm just going to give it a good shake because I haven't used it in a while. Right, so this is my satin glazing fluid. There's also gloss glazing fluid. I always prefer matte or satin. Actually, I just didn't squeeze out much because I don't need much of it. And I just got a little bit of paint on my brush here. And I'm just going to blend that into the glazing fluid. So what this is going to allow me to do is just very subtly make these like a little micro adjustment to the color here. Okay, that's very subtle. We'll see it, you know, a little bit more later. Actually, I'm just going to do the same thing under her chin here. Just to round out her chin. The more square it is, the more masculine she'll look. Sort of a little bit more round and pointy will make her look a little bit more feminine. Alright, so same thing. I'm just going to darken that side of the book. Okay, and then I'm just going to blow dry that again and maybe do another coat. Okay. Same thing here. Gosh, I wonder if I should do another layer. Yeah, I'll do one more. Manning says, I've been away for a while due to work, but I'm glad to be back. I could watch you talk about art all day. Well, thank you so much, Manning. I appreciate that. John says, from the point of age view, this lady supposedly around 67 years old. I can see the wrinkle around her face. 67 years old? I think this woman's probably in her early 20s? 67 years old? I mean, I don't think so, but yeah, I mean, possibly. I don't know if most people, if they would look like this when they're 67, would be quite an achievement. Do I need to do the book anymore? Let's zoom out. Sometimes, you know, you're too close to the painting. It can be hard to see how things have evolved. I think that's maybe okay for right now. And I just want to, I'm going to take my dark blue and just want to come right around on her neck here. Clean up these ears and around her hat. I want those ears to be on the same line. To bring back that collar a little bit, though. And you know what? Maybe I could do a bit of glazing really quickly. On down here, darken that in. want to do some more up here, but I think I might have to call it a day. Huh. Oh, I just want to continue working on this, but I think I am out of time. Okay, I think it's time now to take a look at these artworks side by side and to see how we did. Before we do so, I encourage you to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when upcoming episodes are going to take place. Take a photograph of the work you create and join the Facebook group. Upload your work to the Facebook group, and I think it's this weekend or next weekend, I can't remember, we're going to be doing a special feedback episode where I will look at all and celebrate all of your work and give you a little bit of pointers on how I might improve them, and you can take it, the advice if you like. It's all free. However, if you want to leave a donation as little as $1, feel free to use the PayPal link in the description below or the Super Chat function. I think I saw Holly do that earlier. Thank you so much, Holly. You're awesome. You're an all-star. There's the, you can send me an email or through the Facebook group you can contact me. So, how did this painting turn out? Side by side, in about 2 hours of furious painting, we got to this point. I'm pretty happy. I had to make some changes and little adjustments, kind of simplifying a few areas. Down here, I also kind of darkened this. She had a great use of subtlety that she was able to get away with, that I just didn't have the time to kind of fudge around here. These grapes are right now just, I don't know what that looks like, a blob of I don't know, vomit or something down there. I'm pretty happy with a lot of what else is going on, and you know, in her face I think turned out, this is also a little bit undefined for my tastes, but let's just sort of zoom in and we'll just see when we're a little bit closer. So how about let's start in that top left corner, because that's also where we began today's painting. You know, like that, I mean, there's parts of this I'm okay with. I feel like the grass should probably have come up in front of that white line, because it's kind of floating there. In fact, is this crazy to start doing any extra little stuff up here? I don't know, this might be a bad idea. A little bit of that. Maybe just that's okay. Okay, I'll leave it there. Yeah. Okay, let's continue on in the top here, just looking at the background. You know, for I think all the colors are accurate, and even the brushstrokes aren't too far off. It's just that time-wise, I just didn't have the time to really, because she would have been looking at this really carefully and really modeling this the way that, based on exactly what she saw, whereas mine's much more generic. And there's obviously areas like that probably would get painted out. That's probably painted out, right? So if I really wanted to be accurate, I would have removed a bit more of that. Let's go down to, let's say, the bottom right of the painting now. And you know, this is very thin here, so you see a lot more of my Imprimatura coming through some of these layers, which I don't mind, but it does kind of change the color where we have a bit more of a cooler quality on her original painting where it's a little warmer down here. She's even got like the transparency of the skin underneath this probably, you know, sheer fabric almost, right? Whereas I didn't get any of that. Let's look at the table and her hands. Yeah, this is probably my least favorite part of the painting. Those fingers, I mean, her version, what she's done in here is pretty amazing. Mine looks a little bit clunky in here. Even the book, not my proudest moments, but I think it's okay. It works. We understand pretty much what's there, but. And then let's just sort of bring it all home in on her face right here. So obviously, clearly, much less defined. And really, I probably should have spent more time. I should use like a little white brush and probably go around and get that frill a little bit better. But, you know, it definitely does capture a kind of impressionist spirit, I would say. On her face, her expression, you know, so I guess maybe I made a little bit too dark of a line between her mouth, which makes her look like she's opening her mouth, looking off to the side, maybe just about to say something, versus in the original, she looks maybe a little bit more thoughtful, and she's maybe even almost biting her tongue, right? I mean, slightly different expression there, but it's different nevertheless. Colors are pretty accurate. Again, just, you know, a lot more visible brushstrokes. So while she has a lot of visible brushstrokes elsewhere in the painting, the face in particular is really well articulated and super subtle. It's certainly not done in kind of the slapdash quality that mine is, or even in parts of the rest of her painting. So she worked on that area very carefully with much smaller brushes. She's even got sort of these little white specks all over, you know, as probably part of the pattern of her clothes. But, you know, again, all together, at the end of the day, not bad for an afternoon's little bit of work here, a few hours. But it's also kind of just feeling the way that the Impressionists painted, and kind of the speed that I began the painting with would be, you know, it gives you a pretty clear idea of you know, how the Impressionists worked, and perhaps a greater respect for their process. You know, now in retrospect, when we look back, we're like, that's not easy to do. It's pretty masterful for her to make a painting like that. At the time when she made this painting and her colleagues like Monet and Degas were painting, this type of thing was ridiculed as the sloppiest, easiest, childlike painting you could possibly imagine. And then when you try to do it, you're like, wow, that's certainly not a child. If any child can do that, that would be your golden goose. So let's, I think I'm going to call it a day there, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. I just saw another donation by Manning in there. I thank you so much. And we will see you guys very soon. I can't remember if we're doing an episode this weekend or not. It might be the week after. I'll just have to check the schedule. So again, hit that notification bell, join the Facebook group so you can find out exactly when that is happening. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you wherever you are on our beautiful planet Earth. Until next time, good night.